Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you guys are new. In today's video, we are going to be doing episode 2 to the new series on my channel, which is Makeup for Beginners. And in today's video, I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of start it out by teaching you how I apply my base makeup. So if you didn't see episode 1 to this video, I will have it linked in the eye and down below. I would suggest watching it first. It is my beginner makeup drugstore starter kit, and all of those products are going to be the ones I use throughout this series. I will be using the ColourPop Pretty Fresh Setting Mist, the e.l.f. Flawless Satin Foundation, and the e.l.f. Hydrating Camo Concealer, and the e.l.f. Pressed Powder. As far as tools go, I will be using the brushes from Shop Missy that I mentioned in that first episode, as well as the sponge that I mentioned. This one's also from Shop Missy. If I can remember, the first thing I do before I even sit down to do my makeup is get my sponge wet. So I will insert a clip right here on how I do that, but it's really important in my opinion to get your sponge wet because it's going to help with the blendability, as well as just it's not going to feel as firm like you're beating your face with a tough sponge. So definitely suggest getting it wet and also wringing out the water as you're seeing in this video. I'm back in my old background for this series. I thought it would be nice to do it mostly with natural daylight. I unfortunately had to turn my ring light on for this, but I don't have as many lights on me as I usually do, but the sun is kind of setting, so I don't have a lot of natural light to work with. But moving forward, I will be trying to film these in front of just natural light in front of the window. So like I mentioned in the first episode, I feel like this setting spray can be used as a primer. I don't have anything on my face right now. I washed it earlier today and I did not put moisturizer on. I typically would after I wash my face, but I wanted it to be kind of a blank canvas because I don't know what you all use on your skin before you go into makeup. So I just decided to not wear moisturizer today, and I'll just apply it tonight after I wash my makeup off. But I'm going to go ahead and use some of this setting spray kind of as a primer to just hydrate my skin before I put foundation on it. So I just did about 4 sprays evenly across my face. I'm gonna let it kind of sink in for a minute. I find that my skin's pretty dry, and so it's like normal to dry, but with it getting colder out, it's a little bit more dry. But I find that having a more hydrated base to put my foundation on just helps everything blend a little bit better. It helps it kind of look as if it's meant to be there versus it's just sitting on the skin, because if I'm putting it on top of a dry layer of skin, it's just gonna look a little bit dry and maybe a little bit cakey. So that's the biggest tip that I find to be really helpful. So I've let it sit for about 10 to 15 seconds. It doesn't take very long. And I feel like it just kind of helped my skin look a little bit more refreshed, and it feels a little bit more hydrated. So if you had a hydrating primer, that's kind of what this would do for you, maybe a little bit more intensely. But for the sake of beginner's makeup, I really feel like this would do just fine. You can always add more sprays if you need to. So the next step that I usually do is just go straight into foundation. If you watch any of my other get ready with me videos or anything, you'll see I typically do my eye makeup first. But today we're just talking about base makeup, so I'm not gonna worry about that. So if I were to do my face makeup first, then this is the next thing that I would go in with. Whether you have this foundation or a different one, I do suggest trying to start with smaller layers and then building up those layers for coverage if you want. What I mean by that is instead of putting 3 pumps of this foundation on the back of your hand and then trying to blend it all into your face, it's gonna work a little bit better if you just start with maybe 1 pump or half a pump, depending on how much your foundation is going to pump out. But a general rule of thumb that I like to follow is just to go in with 1 pump, see how I feel about it, and then I can always add a little bit more if I want to. So with 1 pump, you're probably going to get a little bit less coverage, but it just depends on the foundation. So this one I think is about a medium coverage, and you can kind of build it up to be a little bit higher medium coverage. A light coverage foundation is going to allow some freckles, some acne scars, some birthmarks, discoloration, that kind of thing, redness kind of peek through the foundation. So it's just not gonna cover everything up. Medium coverage is going to cover most redness. Maybe if you have a lot of redness, it might show a little bit of that. But in my experience, it's gonna cover up most redness and just show the deeper pigmentations if you have them, as well as maybe some acne scarring and things like that. That's kind of where medium's at, and then full coverage is really meant to just blank everything out. So for a starting point, I think that a light to medium coverage is a really great place to start. Also, we have a little visitor. She loves hanging out. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the foundation, and like I said, I'm gonna use one pump. So I'm gonna put it on the back of my hand because that's just, in my opinion, the easiest thing to work off of. So you have three options, kind of like three main options. One is to blend this out with your hands. I just don't like doing that. I don't like the feeling of makeup products on my fingers, so I don't do that, but you could. The second is to use a brush. This is the Shot Miss A or AOA Studios F27 brush that I mentioned that I think is good for foundation. It's got a flat top and I just think it works really well. The third option is a beauty blender or a sponge. So today I'm going to use a mixture of the brush and the sponge. That's my favorite method to apply foundation. If you apply foundation with your fingers or your brush, you're going to get more coverage because this doesn't really hold on to a lot of the product. It's going to disperse most of what you're putting on the brush onto your face. All right, now we've got another visitor. Like I was saying, if you use a sponge, it's just probably going to absorb a little bit more of the product than the brush or your fingers would. So what I like to do is start out with my brush and I just kind of pat it into the product. I'm not gonna pick all of it up, but I'm picking about probably half of it up, maybe a little bit more. And I'm just going to start swiping it onto my face. So I usually start with my cheeks. I don't really know why I do that. I think probably because it's just like the biggest area. It's also where I have the most redness that I'd like to cover. So that's just what I do. But I would just pick it up and start to spread it all over my face. I kind of avoid putting it right underneath my eye, but it's just really personal preference. You can kind of figure out if you like that or not. But I typically start to just sort of spread it around. Then I'm going to pick up what's left on the back of my hand. I'm trying to get all of it now, and I'm going to put that on my forehead. So every foundation is a little bit different. Some formulas are a little bit more watery and some are a little bit thicker, but I just typically would start with one pump. So if you can see, this is kind of how it's looking. You can see a few brush marks. If I were to really buff, I could probably get those to go away, but I'm just kind of trying to put the product on my face. So now I've kind of got it spread out. And then with the damp sponge, I'm just going to start pressing this into my skin. And just the consistency of the sponge, especially because it's wet, really helps push the product into your skin, and it just blends it in really well. Another thing is that if you're getting ready and you're not near a sink, or maybe someone's using the sink and you can't get to it or whatever, if you've already got it damp but it's kind of feeling a little bit dry, you can kind of refresh it with your setting spray. I wouldn't suggest doing this when it's completely dry to get it wet because you would just use a lot of your spray. But every now and then I will do that if I just want my sponge to feel a little bit more moisturizing. So I'm just pressing this in. I'm not like, using a lot of pressure like that. And I'm just using a kind of pouncing motion. A lot of people like to use the flat end of the sponge or the more round end. It's not really flat, but this end of the sponge. I prefer to use this one for foundation because I feel like I can get it into the little crease here on my nose very well. And I just prefer that for some reason. So with one pump, this is how the foundation is looking. With this foundation, I actually do like to add 2 pumps because I don't feel like it pumps out very much product with one pump, but like I said, it's always good to just start with one. It looks very natural in my opinion, and nothing looks too heavy or cakey. So I'm gonna go ahead and add one more pump. And now that I've already spread out the initial kind of layer of foundation, I'm not gonna worry about using the brush because I kind of already like the finish that I've created with the sponge on the first layer. So I want to just build on top of that versus using the brush and kind of getting some brush lines again. So now I'm just going to put the sponge into the foundation on the back of my hand and then kind of do the same thing, but I'm going to put the product onto one cheek, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually pick up the rest of it and put it on the other cheek, and then I'm just going to blend this out all over my face. When you're doing this, some people go straight over their lips, but I always kind of tuck my lips in because I don't like foundation on them. And then I'm just gonna keep on blending. I'm gonna make sure that I blend it into my ear and also down my neck a little bit. Depending on what color the foundation is and how it compares to your skin, you might need to blend a little bit more on your neck, but you do want to make sure that you do drag it down a little bit. I'm also going to make sure that I get all the edges around my head and forehead to get it close to my hairline. Okay, so this is what the foundation is looking like now. This is more of, like I said, a medium coverage foundation, but I hope you can see that when you just build it up in smaller layers, that it just kind of helps. So what I meant by medium again was that most of my redness is covered up, but you can still see my freckle, and if I get closer, you can see the freckles that I have across my nose and cheeks. They're going to show through just a little bit, but that's kind of the coverage level that this foundation will provide. With most foundations, I don't like to use more than 2 layers because now that I have it kind of initially laid down and I'm happy with how it's looking, I feel like I can get the extra coverage in targeted areas that I really want to with concealer. So concealer is essentially a more concentrated version of foundation, where foundation is meant to give an all over kind of like blurred or filtered effect. The concealer is meant to brighten and conceal, in my experience. So what I mean by that is I like to put this underneath my eyes because A, it adds more coverage. We can see I've got a lot of purple and blue underneath my eyes that I think kind of drags them down. So I want to brighten and conceal. So I want to conceal the blue and then brighten underneath to kind of help those under eye bags look like they're being lifted versus kind of sunken in like they do now. I also apply a few dots here of the product. There's a lot of right and wrong. You'll see on Instagram Reels or TikTok videos or whatever where they draw the triangle and they say this is wrong, you should do this. Honestly, I do think less is more, but when you blend it all out, I just think it's the same. So I don't really think that's necessary. I'm also putting a little bit here on my eyelid because it's going to help kind of cancel any of the veins that you can see I have on this eyelid. I've kind of covered them a little there, but that gives you a nice base if you want to wear eyeshadow, but it also gives you a nice base and just kind of cancels out those veins if you don't want to wear any eyeshadow. So now I'm going to use my sponge again. I don't have any more product on this. This is just the same one I was using with my foundation. And again, I like to use this part of the sponge for my complexion products, and I just start to blend this out again. So you're just going to want to pounce the sponge, and I usually will start to kind of go all over my cheek, but most of that product is blended right here. And then you can see here I have a mark on my nose. I don't know why that's always so red. I don't know. I don't wear glasses. I do wear sunglasses, but I make sure to drag the concealer up onto my nose and into this area here. And I'm purposefully only doing one side of my face so that you guys can see this. But I look up and I'm just very gently patting this out. I'm pulling it down to about right here. And I'm also going to pull it up because I want to really disperse the product. I don't want it to look like you can tell exactly where I just laid that concealer down. And then I'm going to blend it on top of my nose too. I've got a lot of freckles, which sometimes I don't want them to be covered up, but if I'm covering them here, I usually cover them on my nose too. So I'm just going to close my eye and just be very, very gentle with your sponge. This is why I think it's important to use a damp sponge, because you don't want to damage your eye. And that's usually where you're most delicate, right here. And I always use my sponge there. So that just kind of helped cover up that redness a little bit. And so you can kind of see the difference here, or hopefully you can, that the pink and purpley blue kind of colors are pretty much gone on this side, but you can still see them here. And on this side, most of my redness is now really covered up after the foundation, and especially after the concealer. And on this side, there's a little bit of a pink hue coming through, but the foundation covered it for the most part. I do have a good amount of redness though on the lower part of my cheeks. But here with just the foundation, it's just kind of like evened out and a little bit less drastic against my skin tone with the redness. So you can just, I hope, see the difference of what I'm talking about here. As well as on the eyelids, you know, I've got a lot of veins and purpley colors here, whereas it's just a little bit more even and fresh looking on that side. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And I don't plan to speed many things up in this entire series because I remember when I first was learning how to do things and people would skip in their editing and fast forward and go do things off camera and come back. And I would be thinking to myself like, whoa, slow down, because I don't know how to do that. You're just kind of jumping through it, but I want to know how. So that's really what this video series is about. So the videos might be a little bit longer, but again, I'm just going to take my sponge here and really press in the concealer. You can see you can kind of tell where I put it, but as I keep blending, that little line will go away. I just feel like that really gets rid of any of that pink and red that was coming through. Then again, I'm gonna go underneath the eye and I'm gonna bring it up like this and on my eye. Typically, I'm a little more messy with this, so I'm gonna kind of show you how I really blend it in. It's very quick, and I think it's easy because with a sponge, you don't have to be so precise. These are your skin tones, so it just makes it a little bit easier to manage. And the next step is going to be powder. So when I'm applying powder, I want to make sure that my base makeup looks exactly like I want it to, because the powder is really going to set it in place, and it's going to be really hard to blend things after you put a powder on. The foundation and the concealer are liquid, and so when you're using a damp sponge, the water mixes really well with the liquid to help it blend. But water and powders don't really mix quite as well as far as that goes, so I try to make sure that I look the way I want to before I powder things down. So now that I've been sitting here talking, you can see I've got some creasing on my eyelids, and that just happens because where you see this line is when I open my eye, it kind of folds over and creases. So that's where that line is coming from. So I just take my sponge and again, gently pat, but drag like a little bit, but not a lot. Like if you just pat it, it might just take a little bit longer, but I just kind of like pat and pull. But when I say pull, like, I mean, I'm really gentle because this is your eye and you don't want to hurt it, but I do kind of pull on it just a little bit, more of like a roll, I guess, if you wanted to do something like that. I just I don't want to tell y'all something and then, you know, you hurt your eye because of it. So with powder, there's a couple different options. As far as brushes go, these are the two from the set that I would suggest. This is the, again, AOA Studios F30 brush and F26 brush. So if you like this dewy kind of look where you can see a little bit more glow, I would suggest just setting underneath the eyes, if at all. Some people don't like to set at all. The reason you set underneath the eyes is because, again, you see here I've got some creases. Most people have those, and so throughout the day you might notice a little line of the concealer. But if you go in with a powder, it can really help prolong the wear of your makeup. It's not going to completely stop the creasing because, like I said, I don't know of anyone who doesn't have creases underneath their eyes, but I'll use a little brush like this and just kind of swirl it and pat it in the powder, get a good amount on there. And then you're going to want to either, you know, look like tilt your head down so you can really see at your eye. And another thing here that I'm noticing is I do have a little crease, so you can go with your sponge and just, again, gently pat and blend out those little lines of concealer. Now I'm going to go in with a brush that had the powder on it. I'm tilting my head down and kind of looking up so that I can really see that whole area. And I'm just patting this powder right below my eye. This is going to provide a little bit more coverage as well as just really smooth out the look. So this did, the concealer itself kind of cleared out the purple and blue tones, but I feel like this really just blurs it and kind of makes it look like you almost have a filter on underneath your eye. So I'm going to, again, do that same thing on this eye. I'm just patting. You can also use sweeping motions if you'd like, but again, just remember, you don't want to use a lot of pressure. You want to just maybe hold the brush at the end so that you're being very gentle, and you just want to kind of sweep or pat underneath the eye with the powder. I go back and forth on this, but if you like a dewy look, you can leave it at this. That's totally fine. You could just be done. That's it. I have been really into setting my whole face because I think it just helps my makeup last longer throughout the day. So if you've got an 8-hour work day, you're probably getting ready about an hour before work and you might have things to do after work. So that could potentially be like a 10 to 12 hour day. And I just think that powder helps it last a little bit longer. So you can use a brush like this and really pick up a good bit of powder and go ahead and blend it over your face. This powder is pretty compact in here, so I don't find the need to tap it off, but the reason you tap brushes off like that is because if there's a lot of excess in here, when you start to blend it over your face, it just gets a little messy. It can get in your eyes and stuff. It's not gonna hurt you probably, like it's just gonna be more of like an irritant, I guess, but that's kind of why you, like, some people tap their brushes off. So with this, I will just use a light sweeping motion all over my face. And again, I'm just gonna do half my face so that you can see the difference, but it just kind of sets everything down and mattifies, and it will add a little bit of coverage. For most powders will, not all. This one doesn't add a ton, but just a slight amount. So you can see that there's less of a shine now versus this side. So it kind of depends on the look I'm going for and how long I need my makeup to last. You can kind of play with this and see what you like the best, but I just wanted to show you sort of the difference of what it would look like. So I'm gonna go ahead and powder the other half of my face, but let me show you a little bit closer up. It's just not as glowy. Again, I do have this light on, so it's a little glowier on camera than it would be, but I think you get the picture. So again, I'm just going to kind of swirl and buff this all over. Can you guys tell like my allergies are acting up? My nose is so red. Another thing is that if your skin is more oily, a lot of people are more oily in the T-zone, which means across the forehead and kind of down the nose area and chin, meaning like the shape of a T. So you could also just powder along that area and kind of leave the cheeks to be more glowy. But that's something that's helpful if your skin is more oily. You can also keep this in your backpack or purse or whatever throughout the day, and if you get a little bit oily, you can always just, you know, touch up with the powder. So lastly, a step that you can do if this is where you want to leave your makeup, maybe put on some mascara, which we'll do in a later episode, but you can also just touch up with some setting spray. Typically I'd put on my cheek products like blush and bronzer and everything, and then I would apply a setting spray, but for today's video, I did just want to show you kind of what it would do. So I'm going to try and apply it just to half of the face and kind of show you the difference between the two. When you're applying setting spray, you want to hold the bottle, I think they usually say like 6 to 8 inches away from your face, but you just want to make sure that it's not like right next to your face, or else you're going to end up with a big patch of the setting spray. But if you hold it far enough out, you should be able to just have like a nice mist. Something you can try is just to spray it and hold your hand out and kind of see like how it feels and how it sprays, and see about how far you want it to be, because the worst thing is to have setting spray like marks all over your face. But this setting spray specifically, this is again the Pretty Fresh ColourPop one, has such a nice mister that it's really hard to mess this one up. So this setting spray just kind of like adds back the glow. It is not a setting spray that's going to extend the wear of your makeup. It's more so a setting spray that's going to hydrate, add a little bit of glow, and help those powder products again melt into your skin. So we applied the powder to help it last a little bit longer, and now I want to refresh it with the spray to help it look a little bit more like skin versus that powdery finish that we just put on. It might seem a little bit counteractive to put powder and then kind of undo the powder, but really adding that layer of powder locks in all of that foundation and concealer you just put on, because liquids can just move around a little bit more and powders typically just hold on a little bit better. So it adds a little bit of that glossiness back, whereas this side is more mattifying and it's just really your preference. I typically do use a setting spray, but if I'm in a hurry one day, then maybe I don't use it. So I really think that this is a nice product. It especially helps when you have colored cheek products on, like blush and bronzer. It just really helps everything kind of melt together, meaning like it looks blended. It doesn't look like you have a stripe of anything on your face. And I just feel like it really helps. When you're applying setting spray also, make sure to close your eyes and tuck your lips in, because it's not something that you want to get in your eyes or your mouth. So just keep that in mind. And something that I also love doing is after I've sprayed that setting spray and it's still pretty wet, like I just sprayed it on, I again use that sponge and just very, very lightly press onto my skin, and I roll the beauty blender or sponge down. I have peach fuzz, I think you can see it here, and when I press that down a little bit, it just kind of helps it not just stand out so much. And then I will just lightly kind of pat in that setting spray. Again, it just helps everything melt together. I would put some chapstick on, my goodness. My lips are so dry. All right, you guys, that is it for episode 2 of this beginner makeup series. I really hope that this was helpful for you and that you learned something in this video. And for the next video, we will be doing our cheek products. So we will be going over bronzer, blush, and highlight. Do you need it? Will you like it? And how to apply it. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I wanted to make these episodes a little bit longer than the typical how-to videos, because I really feel like it's helpful to actually watch someone do the process that they're talking about without speeding it up, without cutting out a lot. If I've cut things out throughout this, it's probably because my words got tied and I said something I didn't mean to say. So it's not to cut out me blending or anything like that. I really walked through all of this with you. So this is the kind of base of how I do my base makeup, and regardless of whether or not I use a different foundation or concealer or powder, this is the generalized step-by-step process that I use. So with that being said, I really look forward to seeing you guys in episode 3 of this series, which again will be cheek products. And until then, I will see you guys later. Bye.